Welcome back to the Sky News Daily. Niall Paterson here, and glad, certainly not for the first time, that I never have to sit another exam as long as I live. It is, of course, GCSE results day in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, Scotland having a separate system. And this cohort of students had it particularly rough. They enjoyed just one term of secondary school before COVID hit, one solitary term of normality. And yeah, we have certainly covered the range of issues that stemmed from that many times already on this podcast. But as the head of the exam regulator, Ofqual, recently said, exams don't create issues, they expose them. And there were plenty of problems even before the pandemic. Do get in touch with your thoughts. What is the best way to assess 16-year-olds? Sky News Neil on X and Insta. You can also email skynewsdaily@sky.uk. Later on, I'll be speaking to the Education Policy Institute for a breakdown of the results. But let's begin with two head teachers. Becky Arnold of Framingham Earl High School near Norwich and Farhan Adam of Crown Hills Community College in Leicester, named Head Teacher of the Year for his work on improving attainment whilst broadening the aspirations of all his students. Becky, Farhan, great to see both of you. Look, we all remember what it was like to get those results. I'm just wondering what it's like to see results day through the eyes of the head teacher. Becky, you first.
No matter how many years you've been involved with education, it is still a day which is full of kind of stress and anxiety, and you feel it for the children and the teachers and the parents and everybody else. You know, I didn't sleep very well before results came out. You feel it for yourself and you feel it for all the children, and it never gets any easier. It's always full of that kind of stress and anxiety about what the results are going to look like.
Farhan, sweaty palms, sleepless nights. Sounds pretty much like me at 16.
I still remember picking up those results, and they were very sleepless nights beforehand. I've taken a slightly different approach, and I maybe look at life differently now, 30 years on. But the culture we try and take as a school is we work on commitment rather than focusing on target grades. What we do say to our students is, take control of the things that you are in charge of. So coming on time, working hard, and we assess students on those things. What's fascinating is that we've seen our best results this year as a school using that method, which is really nice. And it's helped me to sleep a little bit better because I'm not so worried what the outcome will be. Because I say to our students, you know what, grades matter, yes, they're important, but I just try not to make it define us. So I think we've tried to reverse engineer it if possible.
I mean, Becky, I wonder if you, like Farhan, would like to see us moving slightly away from making this the focus, the big focus of what are cumulatively many, many years of education.
Yeah, definitely. And we, you know, with our young people, we have so many kind of celebration events and moments, and they're all way before the GCSE results come out, because actually we're celebrating them as being part of the Fram community and all that they've given to the school, and whether that's to do with arts or music or sport, whether it's just the friendships that they've developed. You know, we've had some kids in today and we were like, you know, we remember you in year 7 coming in and being quite lonely and nervous, and now look at, you know, you've got this massive bunch of mates and you've got your GCSE results. So it's about all those other life skills which are so important to make you enjoy life and to make people very employable as well.
Farhan, ultimately, for the next step educationally, there is still a real focus on getting grades above what used to be a grade C. Now it's a 4, I think.
Grade 4, yeah, and it's there, but it's a door to the other room. That's what you got to look at it. It's important, but like Becky said, there's so much more that we do at school. It's interesting that performance-related pay is now being removed by the DfE because they understand the be-all and end-all isn't about the result. It's about other things that we do. And yes, it's a door to get through, and we'll help you get through that door. But if you don't, it's not okay, you fall off the edge of a cliff. We'll help you to get through other doors. We're obsessed in this country with measurement and, you know, saying that without measuring, we can't hold people accountable and we can't see how well we're doing. And we have this culture, but really it's about people trying hard. It's about people being human beings. It's about being people and giving back. Those things, you can't measure them, so therefore people don't talk about them. But they're equally, if not more important than just a piece of paper that you get at the end of the year.
Still, I suppose though, Becky, the one thing that the results can show is if there are gaps, if there are differences, be it based on geography, the place that you are in the country, or indeed the level of advantage or disadvantage that you have. We've heard from Farhan that his results have been pretty good this year. I'm just wondering what you see in the results that you've had from your school.
we're similar. We've had a really strong set of results this year. We've had our highest ever kind of 5+ English and maths, which is great. But there is, for us, we notice that some of our gaps, despite our best efforts, continue to be there, and in some circumstances they've widened. So we know that for those children who are disadvantaged and they potentially have a special educational need, actually they've struggled, and what we see is the struggle with attendance at school. So then we have children who've been persistently absent, and we've not been able to get all the services whilst the services are in place, they just can't offer kind of the level of service that maybe all of the children need, and so therefore their results have suffered. That makes life difficult for those young people.
Like Becky said, the resources for the most vulnerable needs to be in place. I mean, we've had to, for example, during the winter months, give 100 hot meals out in the evening because we know that families are struggling for food, especially with the cost of living crisis. Now, as a school, we're not paid to do that. That's not our job for a member of staff to sit there in the evening at 6 o'clock giving out 100 free meals once a week so that families can eat. But we know that people travel 2.5 miles to come and get that. We know that we've got homeless, families. We have to create emergency packs because families are being kicked out overnight and have nothing to be able to live in a hotel with. Sometimes 4-5 members of a family sharing a hotel room. You've got all of these difficulties which are away from education, but are equally important. But schools are having to mop up these issues to be able to support their children.
And I suppose, Farhan, that we cannot have a discussion such as this without noting that this year have been particularly badly hit because of, we all know the reason here, the pandemic. They had one term of normal schooling, and it's only latterly that it has returned to normal. I mean, what effect has that had on your kids?
We had a lot of families who are multi-generational that stay in the same household. So we have grandparents staying with a lot of their grandchildren and grandparents passing away in the same household. So we've suffered, a lot of our children have suffered bereavement, and we've had to have a lot of counselling sessions. And we were in lockdown for the longest. Leicester was in lockdown the longest in terms of the whole country. So we've had a lot of that. But we've had to be resilient, and we've not let our students wallow in that kind of situation, and we've tried to rise above it, give them the support that's needed, pastoral support that's required so that they can lift themselves up. And the fact that we came out with, some really good results for our context and for our school, it's really pleasing to know that, we've bucked the trend.
I mean, Becky, the knock-on effects of COVID are things that we have covered a number of times on this podcast, but time and again, we keep coming back to two key topics: the mental health of the kids that went through the pandemic in that fashion, but also the absenteeism that perhaps has resulted as a consequence of it. I mean, is that your experience?
Yeah, definitely. We've had a rise in young people who've had issues with their mental health, and we have, as Farhan says, as a school, you kind of take on that role. It was talked about through COVID. Schools were the fourth emergency service, and you do everything you can because I'm an English teacher, and I came in to teaching because I was passionate about my subject. But sometimes the skill set we have in school are not specialised enough. So, the level of need for young people following COVID has been huge, and we've done all that we can in terms of staff training and helping those young people, but you sometimes need to rely on other services, and unfortunately they've just not been there because there hasn't been the funding for them. So it's been really difficult, and persistent absence, part of that comes from ill health. So we do have children who've had long COVID. We do have some children who have been young carers, and we've been working with them to get them into school because they've been looking after mum or dad, at home. And similarly, once you're out of school, getting back in is difficult, and we all know that the longer you have off, the more difficult it is to come back because you've missed more and all of those things. So it just becomes this vicious cycle that the young people are in.
And I suppose again, Farhan, the kind of the additional factor in that is that the overwhelming body of empirical evidence suggests that historically, at least, those who are most disadvantaged are those who will be hardest hit by problems such as anxiety, broader mental health concerns, persistent absenteeism, and the gap existed between the well-off and the disadvantaged even before COVID.
Yeah, it's just been exacerbated because of this, but that's where we have to be that fourth emergency service. Like Becky said, the gap, is widening. This is where I'm hoping with a change in government, there will be an understanding of what's required to be able to support these children. I know they're looking at a review and looking at the curriculum and looking, those things are important, but the support services that surround schools are equally important.
Becky, given all of that, I'm just wondering whether or not, as part of that review that is ongoing in government, we should be looking at questions as fundamental as whether or not GCSEs are the right thing for 15 and 16-year-olds.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there are a broad range of level 2 qualifications out there. Schools aren't just offering GCSEs; they are offering, the Cambridge Technicals and the BTECs and a wide range. But I think that you all still think that when you're 16, you sit your GCSEs, and so then there is sometimes, maybe unconscious, but a bias towards when you look at a child, if they've not got a set of GCSEs and they've got something else instead, you would think, oh well, why did they do that? That's different, and maybe different is wrong rather than right, and it shouldn't be the case. There are some amazing technical qualifications out there for young people to do. For us as a school, we can't currently offer things because we don't really have the space or the facilities or the expertise within our staff. There's lots going into bringing new teachers on board, but we also need to be looking at those new qualifications as well to make sure we've got a body of teachers who are totally skilled up and are able to present and deliver these qualifications, but also that, in industry and in business, people are saying, a level 2 BTEC is just as good as a GCSE, if not better.
So I think there's the education of the wider public of the variety that's out there. T-levels and apprenticeships are starting to gather more momentum now, but the traditional route of going to university are the things that society judges people on, and I think we need to move away from that judgment, and there needs to be a wider education. Whatever the review that comes out of government, there needs to be a campaign to educate the public about what the changes will mean, so that whatever the route is that are available, exit routes for students, even within GCSEs, there's a misunderstanding amongst the public sometimes, and I think we need to educate them to be able to understand that there are different routes and it's horses for courses, and sometimes students have a different set of skills. I mean, under the previous government, it was very much an EBAC kind of focus, which, languages, doing history or geography, English, maths and science. But there are students that are talented in art, and there are students that are talented in sport, and we need to be able to open those avenues for them. But again, it comes back to accountability. Schools are held accountable on these subjects, and therefore if we don't move away from that and allow schools the flexibility to offer what the students need rather than what government think people need, then I think we're not going to be able to meet the needs of our students.
Farhan Adam, Becky Arnold, keep up the good work. Many thanks for joining us. We'll be back in just a moment with a fuller breakdown of the results and what they tell us about this and future academic years. Welcome back. So we have heard from the head teachers, the educators themselves, about what the results show about the schools they work in. But what of the bigger picture? What do the results tell us about the state of education in those parts of the UK that sit GCSEs? Louis Hodge is from the Education Policy Institute. Louis, clearly you'll still be crunching the data and finding out what a lot of it means. It is still early days. But tell us what we know so far.
One thing we have been able to have a look at today, and quite strikingly, London sticks out like a bit of a sore thumb here as being better performing on average than other parts of the country. This is something that we've seen happening over the last probably 15 or 20 years, that London has been a much better performing region. The reasons behind that are quite difficult to unpick.
I'm wondering if it plays into this advantage-disadvantage argument, because no one is saying, of course, that there is not poverty and extreme poverty in the capital city, but there is proximity to wealth and there is proximity to opportunity.
Where London is quite different in terms of the demographics is that London is home to a broad range of ethnic groups, and some of those ethnic groups do actually do kind of better on average in GCSEs and other attainment measures than white British pupils, for example. But we shouldn't also forget that there's kind of other wider things, like schools in London receive more funding per pupil than schools in other parts of the country, and we do know that obviously having more funding is linked to higher attainment as well.
Louis, when do we first start detecting this gap in attainment between the disadvantaged and others?
Even when pupils are really entering the early years before they even got to primary school, we see that there are already gaps, and those gaps are again different in different places. So if you take London, for example, pupils in the early years are already, the disadvantaged pupils are already 3.4 months behind in their learning before they're even starting school. And those gaps are even bigger in other parts of the country. So if we take the Northwest, for example, that's over 5 months already before they even start at school.
Does that not suggest that if we are looking to change the system to ensure that disadvantaged children have these same opportunities, we're not just simply talking about the 2 years for GCSE, we're not even just talking about secondary education, we're going back to nursery here.
This is a problem that even goes beyond the school system. And the school system, throughout that time, is just growing and growing and growing. There's definitely, I think, a need to think about how we close those gaps and how we close them early. Leaving it until the last 2 years to then try and bring all of that back is almost an impossible feat at that point. But I think this also feeds into the kind of, again, the wider public policy debate and around child poverty more generally. And so it's very welcome that we've seen that the new Labour government now looking at having a proper cross-government child poverty strategy.
What will your submissions be? What would your recommendations be at a time like this? You've certainly done a lot more thinking about the solutions than I have. I suspect you may even have done a lot more thinking than some of the new ministerial team at the Department for Education.
A couple of kind of big things that I think we've talked a lot about the disadvantaged gaps. I think this gap between these disadvantaged pupils and their more well-off peers. And I think we'd really like to see funding targeted to where those gaps are biggest. So at the moment, funding, there's a whole very complex model which allocates funding to schools, but as part of that, funding is allocated based on certain demographics of the pupils. So if a school has more pupils that are, for example, eligible for free school meals, they will get some more money for that, but it doesn't pay attention to the gaps. And as we were saying, when the gaps are so much bigger in one part of the country than the other, that's then not reflected in the funding. And I think the other big challenge we have, and it's a challenge that the school system and the education system faces more widely, is around teacher retention and recruitment. We kind of would suggest that it might involve offering some incentives for teachers to move to some parts of the country that might be deemed, should we say, more challenging.
Given the fact, Louis, that your research shows that in the majority of the places where GCSEs are being sat, the disadvantaged kids are 20 months behind. We're not talking about a quick fix here. We're not talking that something even that might be turned around in the next handful of years, perhaps.
That's definitely true. And given how early in a child's development these gaps are opening up, certainly a quick fix over 1 or 2 years isn't gonna cut through massively. Probably about thinking a bit more strategically about that longer term period. It's somewhere we would invest a lot of money. I guess the one thing to remember with all of this is all of these children, whether they are disadvantaged or not, but particularly disadvantaged, these are the adults of the future. They are going into the labour market, and so the value to the future of the country as a whole of closing these gaps is potentially absolutely huge.
Louis, thanks very much indeed. Do remember to give the podcast a follow if you've liked what you've heard. A review always helps us out. And let us know the stories that you think we should be covering. Sky News Daily at sky.uk. The email at Sky News Neil on X and Insta. We'll see you again tomorrow.